at the time of this recording, Coach, we're at the end of the playing year. And so I'm wondering, what's your process that you go through when you're looking back over the course of a season and evaluating that season?
There was a legendary Hall of Fame coach named Billy Moore who coached at several places, including UCLA, won a couple national championships, coached the great Andy Myers Drysdale, and was a mentor of mine. And she always said that when the season was over, you had to perform an autopsy. And by that she meant it had to be some deep digs and cuts, learning what you can do better, maybe what did you do well. I remember I tell this story all the time. Another close mentor of mine was the late great Don Meyer, and I would go up and spend time with him at his home in Nashville. I remember one summer we were sitting upstairs in his den. His den happened to be on the third floor at his home in Nashville, and he had his notebook out and it had practice plans and drills. And every now and then he'd tear paper out and wad it up and throw it away. And I said, "Coach, what are you doing?" He said, "Well, I'm looking at some drills and some plays that we don't need next year."
Mhm.
I really think as coaches, sometimes we get away from that. We always are looking for things to add. And sometimes the best thing we can do is look for things we can delete to make things simpler, more structured, more easily understandable for our players. So certainly been going through that process. On our level, it's different now. For the first and second round of the NCAA tournament we hosted, and we had two recruits visiting at the same time, which is ludicrous. And then the Final Four is over, and 2 days later we're starting a long series of portal recruit visits. The big thing was to go back and evaluate the season before, look at how the season progressed, some of the things that went into our success, some of the things that may have caused us from peaking, and then continuing with roster management. I think that's the big catchphrase in collegiate athletics now.
What kind of impact do you think that that's going to have specifically on the coaches? I've heard a lot of talk about just in general about, the busyness of it and from the player's perspective, that kind of thing. But on our profession, what kind of impact do you think that's going to have?
I think there's a couple of things there that I think are really really important. The first thing is I think how you play the game. I think it could have an effect on your system. I was at Auburn a few years back and was talking about this with Bruce Pearl, and he was talking about it used to be you had a specific system of play. This is how we play offensively and defensively, special situations. Then you go out and you recruit players that fit into that system. Well, now, at least on the women's side, there's 2,500 kids in the portal. Everybody's got kid, and the problem with portal, it's almost like speed dating. These kids want to make a decision quickly, so gone is the time where you can get to know their parents and their family. They get to know you. You get to know you get to know all the things you need to know to make the best decision for your program. But now, boom, it's bang bang. It happens now. So you're building a new roster every year. It'll be incredibly rare for a coach to go on the season and have four seniors that have been with them for 4 years, like back in the day. I know there was a time where I really enjoyed running motion offense, which I think is a great offensive attack. Very very similar to that which Bob Knight ran, based on spacing and cutting and reading. And it takes a kid maybe a year or 2 years before they're really, really excellent at motion. And now I may not have a kid for a year.
Mhm.
I mean, I may be getting a kid, two or three kids who are senior transfers. So I think you have to give some thought into what type of system you play. One of the things that Bruce talked about is now you look in the summer and see what team you have, then decide how you're going to play, which is diametrically opposite of the way it used to be. The other thing is it gives you spend a lot more time trying to figure out how to create chemistry because it has to be done very short time. Developing culture because you're getting new teams every year. New teams. Half your team may be changing every single year, and so you have to take a look and I think peel back some things that maybe were reliable things for you in the past on how you slowly built this culture and this team, and you have to find a way to accelerate it a little bit. And I don't think any of those things are good, by the way. I don't think that that's good for players. I don't think it's good for coaches. I don't think it's good for the sport, but it's here.
Mhm.
So instead of complaining about it, you got to find a way to maximize it. And the first thing I think is your system of play, and then you got to look at the normal things you do in terms of building your team away from the court.
I've seen you talk previously about building championship culture. And in light of what you just said, are there any practical things, maybe things you talked about before all of this happened, but even so now in this current climate that you would say are good ideas for building that championship culture?
Well, the thing about culture is everybody has one. If you don't do anything, that's a culture. Not all cultures are good. There's some toxic cultures. So, the first thing I think you have to do with culture is you have to define it, and I think you have to put it in writing. I think it has to be, and I think it has to be about the intangibles. I don't think your culture's about winning or losing. I think your culture is about standards, and I think that's very important that your players know that we're gonna judge you on your ability to be the best you can be as a person, as a student, as a player on a daily basis. And
Mhm.
then I think once you have it on paper, part of that process, you have to bring the team in, let them be part of talking about what they want their culture to look like. Because once they're involved in talking about that, then you're going to have greater ownership. And there's really no way, the coach that writes down their goals or writes down what their culture is and just gives it to their team is starting at a disadvantage. These kids want to be involved in those decisions. And again, it's going to vary. There's some obvious things that I think we talk about culture wise, but one of my favorite quotes about culture comes from Doc Rivers, and that is you have to fight for your culture every day. You cannot take a day off. You cannot say, ooh, there it is. I've got my culture. As soon as you do, there's going to be a crack. Your standard is your standard, and it starts with the head coach, and then it filters down to the assistant coach. Those standards have to be applied by the people at the top before the people below them will buy in. So whether that culture is, I'll give you an example. When I was at LSU previously, this is actually my second stop at LSU, and I was working for legendary coach Sue Gunner, and we took a team to the Elite Eight. I mean, this close from going to the school's very first ever Final Four. And the following year, we had about 90% of our offense and rebounding coming back. Simone Augustus was coming back. We brought in Sylvia Fowles. Tamika Johnson was coming back. It was a powerful team. And that summer, the football coach at LSU at that time was a guy named Nick Saban. And we had Nick come over and talk to our team. And he talked about being process driven. He was not into numerical goals, no win so many games. He wasn't into destination goals. He never talked to his football teams that our goal is to win 12 games. He never talked to his football team as our goal is to get to the playoffs. Everything was driven by the process. And for him, the process was being the absolute singularly best you could be at that particular moment and then repeat. And, he'll even talk about that people that spend time thinking about winning or thinking about results are taking away energy and focus and concentration that should be put forth in that particular moment. One of the things he talked about was, other than the quarterback, he doesn't want his offense looking at the scoreboard. They have no reason to look at the scoreboard. It doesn't matter if it's first and three, first and 10, second and three, third and four, first quarter, second quarter, third quarter. If they're up six, that has absolutely nothing to do with what you're supposed to do on this next play. And that's all I want you to concentrate on. I want you to dominate your opponent for these next 5 seconds. And then we're going to huddle up, and then I'm going to want you to do it again. And when you put together those types of things, so he talks to our team about being processed. He goes through all of this. About a month later, we bring in our captain, Tamika Johnson, said, hey, what Sue says, get with your teammates. I need you guys to come forth with me with your goals for the season. Again, giving the players ownership by allowing that part of the process. So a week later, Tamika comes back and she sits in the conference room. The staff's in there, and she goes, Coach, we just got one goal. I mean, I was so disappointed. I thought she was going to say Final Four, national championship. And Coach Gunner asked what it was. He said, we want to be the best practice team in America. That's when I knew that that Coach Saban's message had got through to him. But then Coach Gunner on another level said, "Love it. That's going to be our goal this year. But here's what I need you to do: go back to your team. What does that look like? What does that sound like? What does it feel like? How are we going to be able to circle up at the end of the day and evaluate it? How are you going to hold each other accountable?" So they had another meeting, came up with a very real things. But that team went to the school's first ever Final Four and started a run of 5 consecutive Final Fours. And each year, the goals of the team were intangibles. They were never numerical or destination driven. And I think that's what your culture has to be. There's something, Clemson practice facility. There's a giant sign that says the standard is your best. And I think if you can get everybody from your managers, your coaches, your trainers to just concentrate on being their best. You're not comparing yourself to your rival or the team that was there 10 years ago or who it doesn't all you're doing is coming in trying to be your best every day. That's when you have a special culture. Now there's things that go into that. You have to be able to how do we measure that? You have to be able to hold each other accountable. Very, very important. You have to be able to reward the behavior you want repeated. So when your culture's working, when it's doing what it's supposed to do, you need to make sure that your people know that they're doing a great job, and this is why. And by the way, culture is only tested during bad times. You a 3-game losing streak. You have to suspend a player. 2 players go down within. That's when you find out your culture. Everybody's got great culture when they're winning and healthy and everything fine. But that's when you find out when your culture is at its best, is when it can help drive your team forward in a positive direction when things are going bad.
I frequently get asked about practice planning, and you brought it up, so I'll go ahead and mention it now. What does a good practice look like to you?
Well, that is an absolutely phenomenal question. I'll tell you why, because I think practice design in itself is one of the singularly most important things to the success or failure of your team. And I think it's a critical part to your culture. If you conduct your practice in such a way where your terminology, your drills, I mean, whatever your culture is, you can drive that through your practice. Practice itself can be very different. Can be very different. Like John Wooden used to spend one whole day on offense, then the next day defense, and then the next day he'd come back and do offense. Gary Blair, Hall of Fame coach I worked for at A&M, would spend the first 2.5 hours of practice every day on offense, and then he turned over to me for defense. I spent about 30 minutes on defense. Here at LSU, we're offense, defense, offense, defense, offense, defense. So there's a lot of different ways to do it. Here are some common denominators to what I think make great practices, and that's flow and pace. I think really great practices are snappy. They move. Like, for instance, we don't take water breaks in our practice. We have water stations. When you come out of a drill, you want to grab some water, but we're moving. We are constantly moving in practice. I think a couple other things that are important to do in practice. This is a Dick Bennett thing. Be good at the things you have to do a lot.
Mhm.
You don't need to practice 19 things. You need to have a base of things that you're going to work on every day, because that's what's important to how your team plays and to how you need to beat the primary teams on your schedule. One of the things I've learned from Coach Malk is you can't shoot too much. We do more shooting here than any place I've ever been. And, her thing is we can sit here and we can chop it up all you want. But the bottom line is the ball has to go in the basket. So we carve out specific times to do shooting. It's not like we come in and do 10 minutes. We'll do shooting at various times of practice, and it's designed, structured practice. The next thing I think that's important is creating chaos in practice. Games are chaotic. No game unfolds the way you think it in your mind. You think, but I think it was Mike Tyson said we all got a great game plan till we get knocked in the mouth.
Mhm.
Then how do you respond? Krzyzewski and Knight were 2 great ones at creating chaos. By the way, when I speak, I always say that the 2 most important things that we teach kids, it's not dribbling or passing or shooting or rebound. It is thinking and talking. Thinking and talking. And I've yet to have a coach disagree with that. But then I'll follow that up with how are you teaching and installing thinking and talking in your practice? Your kids should be talking in every single drill. And if they don't know how, it's important that you show them. Get them moving their mouths. Buzz Williams used to record practices on a CD and play it in his car on the way home to hear what his practices sound like.
Hmm.
And we'll talk to our kids. What does a good practice sound like? What would a blind man think about your team if he came to practice and all he could do was hear what that good practice sound like? Thinking comes from, I think, a lot of times disadvantage drills, 5-on-4 open perimeter where 4 people have to guard 5, or maybe it's a change segment where you're playing 4-on-4 and you say change the offense goes to defense. Things that make them have to think. I think that's really important. That's not to say that there's not benefits to doing some 5-on-0 offense and some of those things, but there's got to be parts of your practice where they have to figure it out. By the way, that's one of my favorite phases and phrases in practice when we're doing on something and the player look at us and say, figure it out, figure it out. And then if they don't, then we can stop and help them or show them some film. But you just can't spoon feed them solutions in practice and then expect them in a game to make decisions.
Mhm.
So I think flow and pace of practice is really important. Number one, that helps with conditioning. Number two, it creates more game-like situations. And number three, it just helps with the thinking and talking. Now, what we'll do here at LSU is we're going to practice 3.5 hours in October, November. In December, it'll knock down to 2.5. In January, 2. In February, it might be an hour. So we'll gear it down. But by that time, the majority of our teaching is done. Then we're just trying to either tweak or repeat or maintain the habits that we've taught. But Tony, I'm a big, big, big believer in practice. If you're a young coach, you need to go spend time with a veteran coach and talk about thoughts and ideas. That doesn't mean you have to do the practice exactly the way that person does. One of my favorite things is to go watch other coaches practice. I've done that my whole career. And by the way, I'm at LSU, and some of the best practices I've seen designed and executed on the high school level.
Mhm.
Seen great practices at the JUCO level, Division II, Division III. There are great coaches that teach on all levels. Don't think that you got to watch a Kim Mulkey, a Don Staley, or a Gino Auriemma to get all the practice secrets. There's tons of great coaches on all levels.
Aside from the fact that there are a lot of ways to skin a cat, what kind of structure do you like in practices?
I absolutely am in love with what Kim does here at LSU. I've said this a million times. I think she is the best practice coach I've ever worked with,
Mhm.
and I've worked for about 6, 7 Hall of Fame coaches. One of the things I like is that we come out real quick. She wants to start real quick. We'll huddle up. We'll have a thought for the day, and then we go into a 2-line speed layup drill where they're held accountable for their misses and their makes, and then we go straight from there to Feed the Post series. This is important to me because post play is huge here at LSU.
Mhm.
Winning in the paint is a big part of what we do. So we practiced 102 times last year. 102 times we did Feed the Post. Now, I think there are certain things that you want to repeat every day, but I think within that repetition, you have to have some variety. So, for instance, we do Feed the Post drill one day, and we got the defense playing behind the post, and we're putting token pressure on the wing. The next day, we may be up the line on the wing, making them work to get open, and we may be fronting the post. So we got to work on sealing and passing against pressure. The next day, we may feed the post and have the wing dig in so we get an inside, outside, and a repost. But because posting is so big, we work on it every day in some shape or form. Some of the best programs I've been in always have a beginning part of practice that get their kids talking and thinking, but is an important part of what they do, either whether it's offensively or defensively. Kim is very good at, matter of fact, she's the best in terms of her phrasing of things at practice. I'm old enough and have been around some good ones that Kim will stop and say something. I'll be like, wow, she just planted the seed for next week. We may have practiced for 6 straight days. And, you can see the mental fatigue and she may stop practice. She goes, I got to tell you something, guys. We've had a pretty good week, but this isn't a Final Four type of workout here. Now, she could have said this is a piss poor workout, But by saying Final Four workout, she just told the kid, wow, coach thinks we can go to the Final Four. The other thing she does is she can be intense in her correction, but she is absolutely nuts in her praise. She will scream praise. And I think that's so important. I think young coaches here, they think everything's about, getting on the kids and correcting everything. And there's a lot more to it than that. The other part of practice I think is very good in terms of terminology is teaching with your words. So Sally makes a pass in the post. You say, that's a bad pass, Sally. You've done no teaching whatsoever. You have not told Sally why that's a bad pass. Sally, you got to bounce that ball on the outside knee away from the defense. Come on. Now I did some instruction. Same thing with praise. Good pass, Sally. Sally may not know what the heck she did. She may have just, luck. Sally, way to throw a ball away from the defense and give it to her at her outside knee. That's how you teach. That's how you build. Your terminology and your phrasing are everything in a really good teaching environment, and that's what Kim does very well. She makes sure we're on top of our game. We have shared terminology, but that's huge to me in practice. What you say, how you say it, when you say it, who says it.
One of the things that I noticed when you guys were here is the ability that she has to involve the staff. And I feel like for younger coaches, especially, that sometimes can be a challenge. I think part of it is personality. I think part of it is they just don't know how to. And you have been a long time assistant coach, but you're not an on the side, just give some suggestions to the head coach. Can you talk about how you all integrate various members of the coaching staff there to really maximize the practice time that you have?
Absolutely. Well, in the best case scenario, which is what I had at LSU, and I've had a lot of times in my career, things are done intentionally. When I first came to LSU, I had never worked for Kim. We'd known each other, but I'd never worked for her. So that summer, when I'm working out the post players, I'm one of the post coaches here. Kim came over and watched, and she basically told me, "You got the workouts. In June, this is you. I want to see what you teach and how you teach." She came over every day and evaluated and watched. Then she met with me, told me, "Here's some things that are relevant to how we do. Can you incorporate this?" So I started working that. When we got to the school year and practice started, she'll tell you my first 2 weeks, I was a coach on the sideline. I was quiet. I was listening. I was observing. And then when I felt comfortable, then I started placing myself in, unless it was someplace that she had placed me. We have staff meetings. Bob, when we get to this segment, you got the team. These are the things I want you to make sure you hit on, or it may be one of our other coaches, but she's very specific in what she wants everybody to do. It's very well defined. And then, if you're competitive like I am, you want to be as good as you can be at what she gives you. And then with time, you get a feel. Like I know there are days when she wants me to take the lead in some things where she'll think, and she may even let me know. She may say, "Bob, I think they need to hear another voice today other than mine." And so I'll take the lead in that practice. But a lot of it's feel. But I think the best head coaches know how to communicate with their staff. It's no different than a coach with their players. The best coaches have well-defined roles for their players, works with them on developing those roles. The head coach does that with assistant coaches. These are your roles. This is what you need. Get some evaluation every now and then. The best head coaches have always done a good job of how they orchestrate their staffs and use them. Yeah, Kim's great at it. I mean, as an assistant coach, that's who you want to work for. You don't want somebody just throw you out there and see what happens. You want somebody to say, "I mean, this is what I need. This is where I need it." And that role development is just as important with the staff as it is the players.